They promised to take care of him. My parents received $1.2 million to look after Grandpa. I remember my father saying, as if money could buy compassion. At first, it looked like they meant it lavish dinners, photo-perfect family smiles. But that illusion shattered the night they threw him out. It was storming when I found Grandpa standing alone in the rain, soaked to the bone, his suitcase at his feet like an afterthought. I didn't hesitate. I took him in. I had nothing, just a cramped apartment, a failing freelance career, and a heart full of guilt for not stepping up sooner. But I gave him warmth, dignity, and peace. A few months later, he passed away quietly in my arms. I thought that was the end of our story. But at the will reading, the lawyer opened Grandpa's final letter. And what he revealed made the entire room fall silent. Even I was stunned. When Grandpa first moved in with my parents, it was like watching actors rehearse for a play they didn't believe in. Suddenly, my mother Regina started baking again, pies cooling on the windowsill like we were in a Hallmark movie. My father Thomas cleared out his home office so Grandpa could have the guest room, and even installed handrails in the bathroom. They called it care. I called it staging. It all began one sunny afternoon when Grandpa Walter arrived in a rented car from Montana. He looked smaller than I remembered, slightly stooped, thinner, his skin pale beneath his old wool coat. But his eyes? Still sharp as winter glass. I hadn't seen him in years. We exchanged an awkward hug. I remember thinking, he's not here for family, he's here for survival. Later that day, as I sat by the window drinking tea, I overheard the conversation that would plant the first seed of unease. My father's voice quiet, but trembling with excitement. A full $1.2 million. In our account tomorrow. My mother's voice followed, honeyed and calculated. We'll give him the best care. He won't want for anything. This is good for all of us. They had signed a private agreement. Grandpa would transfer $1.2 million to their account in exchange for long-term care, and the promise that word again that he would never be sent to a nursing home. Grandpa had insisted. He wanted to be with family. He thought love could be bought with sacrifice. At first, everything was a performance of affection. Family dinners. My mom doted on him. Dad, I made your favorite chicken pot pie. My dad bragged to neighbors. Took my father in. That's what family does. But the cracks were already forming. They didn't ask him about his life. They didn't sit with him. They checked boxes, smiled for social media, and moved on. Behind closed doors, I heard sighs, long, exasperated ones. I noticed the passive-aggressive comments. Dad, maybe don't touch the thermostat so often. You left crumbs on the counter again. When I came to visit on Sundays, Grandpa clung to conversation like it was oxygen. He asked about my freelance projects, my tiny apartment, even my broken coffee machine. You still writing those nonprofit reports? He'd ask, pretending it was impressive. And I'd nod, pretending I believed it was enough. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. One Sunday, I arrived to find the energy in the house cold, like something invisible had snapped. My mom barely said hello. My dad didn't come out of the garage. Grandpa was in his room, staring out the window, silent. His suitcase was already zipped shut. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming both outside and inside this family. And soon, they'd show their true faces. Things unraveled slowly at first. So slowly, it almost felt like I imagined it. Grandpa's breakfasts shifted from fresh eggs and toast to store-brand cereal in a chipped bowl. The extra blankets on his bed disappeared. The thermostat crept down 2 degrees. My mom started saying things like, Dad's gotten a bit demanding lately, hasn't he? He's not adjusting well. Maybe he's too used to doing things his way. It was subtle, but undeniable. Affection turned to tolerance. Tolerance turned to resentment. And Grandpa felt it. He never said a word directly, but I could see it in his posture, more slumped, more silent. The man who once built barns with his bare hands now barely left his chair. One afternoon I came over after a client meeting and found him sitting outside on the porch alone, sweater draped over his shoulders, just watching the rain fall. You okay, Grandpa? I asked. He gave me a small smile, the kind people wear when they're trying not to look like they're fading. Just thinking, hard to be old in a house where no one really sees you. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I went inside instead, and found my mother angrily wiping down the kitchen counter. He spilled tea on the rug again, she snapped. Do you know how expensive cleaning costs are? I wanted to say, you received over $1 million to take care of him, but I bit my tongue. Again. My father wasn't any better. He used to at least fake politeness. Now, he barked at Grandpa over trivial things: how loud the TV was, how long the shower ran, how lazy he was for napping in the afternoon. You know how much it costs to have him here, Claire? He once muttered, not realizing I was in the hallway. It's like babysitting with none of the cute. Babysitting, that was what Grandpa had become to them: a burden, an invoice they regretted paying. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late October. A heavy storm rolled in from the west, the kind that rattled windows and curled under door frames. I was curled up in my apartment, halfway through a grant report, when my phone rang. It was Grandpa. Claire. His voice was shaking. They told me to leave, said I was too much. I'm outside now. Can you come? I dropped everything. Drove through blinding rain, tires skidding at red lights, hard in my throat. And there he was, standing at the end of my parents' driveway, in the pouring rain, holding a soaked duffel bag, shivering. No coat. No umbrella. No place to go. My parents didn't come outside. They didn't say goodbye. I didn't even knock on the door. I just walked to him, took his arm, and said, "You're coming home with me." My apartment wasn't much. One bedroom, a half kitchen, a leaky radiator, and floors that creaked like they were tired of holding people up. But it was warm. It was mine. And that night, it became his too. I handed Grandpa a towel, a dry hoodie, and my bed. You sure? He asked, hesitant. I'm not sleeping while you're on that floor, I said firmly. Non-negotiable. He smiled, tired but grateful, and lowered himself slowly onto the mattress. I pulled a spare blanket over his legs, then made a makeshift bed for myself on the couch cushions, stacking them on the floor with an extra pillow. Neither of us slept much. The storm outside had faded, but inside me, a different storm was brewing: anger, shame, and something worse: helplessness. My parents had taken $1.2 million and tossed the man who raised my father like trash, and I had nothing but pride and a monthly freelance retainer barely covering rent. The next morning, I made black coffee the way he liked it. Grandpa sipped it in silence. Then he looked at me and said, "This is better than any mansion with cold hearts." I swallowed the lump in my throat. We fell into a rhythm. Mornings started with toast and soft-boiled eggs. Afternoons were quiet red while I worked. At night, we talked. He told me about his youth on the Montana ranch, waking at 4 a.m. to fix fences, harvesting hay under the scorching sun, how he built everything with his hands and never asked for much. Hard work was my language, he said. Respect was my reward. But when my grandmother passed away and his knees began to fail, the house became a burden. He sold it, thinking he was buying peace, buying care. I thought I was paying for love, he said. But you can't buy what someone doesn't have. That line stayed with me. I carried it around like a bruise. In return, I shared my truth, that I'd left a stable job at a nonprofit to build a tech app for small farmers, something to optimize irrigation and crop rotation using data analytics. It's barely more than an idea, I confessed. A few lines of code, a wireframe, and a lot of debt. But Grandpa didn't flinch. Then you're already further than most, he said. Anyone can talk about dreams. Few start walking. There was no pity between usefully quiet understanding. We were both discarded in different ways, but together, we began to stitch something real. Still, I couldn't ignore how little I had. Rent was due soon, groceries were getting thinner. I applied for weekend delivery shifts to make ends meet. Grandpa insisted on helping around the apartment, folding laundry, watering plants, even fixing the broken bathroom light with a roll of wire and a butter knife. One evening, as we ate instant noodles on the floor, I asked him, "Do you miss your old life?" He looked at me, held the plastic spoon to his lips, then said, "I miss the land. I miss your grandma. But I don't miss being invisible, not here, not with you." That broke me. I realized I couldn't give him back the life he once had, but I could give him something no one else had: dignity. It started with a cough. At first, it was just a dry tickle in Grandpa's throat, barely noticeable over the hum of the radiator or the soft rustle of newspaper pages. But within a week, it deepened. A low, rattling sound that shook his frame and lingered long after he stopped. "Just the weather," he insisted. "Old lungs, nothing new." But I knew better. The man who once survived winters in Montana without central heat was now shivering under 3 blankets. He grew quieter, moved slower. His hands trembled when lifting a coffee cup. I began to worry every time he napped too long. I took on more shifts, early mornings and late nights, delivering groceries and prescriptions around town. Some days I came home to find him still sitting by the window, unchanged from when I left. Other times, he was asleep on the couch, an open book resting on his chest, his breaths shallow. I tried to keep life normal. I made soup. I found old Western films he loved. I joked about installing a ranch backdrop in the living room to remind him of home. He'd smile, but there was always something behind I's resignation, maybe, or knowing. One night, after a particularly long coughing spell, he looked up and said, "I'm sorry, Claire. I didn't mean to become another weight on your back." The words hit me like a punch to the ribs. "Don't say that," I snapped, tears already blurring my vision. "You are not a burden. You are the reason I still believe in family." He didn't argue. He just nodded, then reached out to gently squeeze my hand. His grip was weak, but the message was strong. "Thank you." A few days later, I came home and found him slumped forward in the armchair, his forehead burning with fever. I called an ambulance. In the ER, they diagnosed him with severe pneumonia. "Age and exposure," the doctor said gently. "We'll do everything we can, but he's very fragile." I sat beside his hospital bed every day. I brought his favorite books, though he barely had the strength to read. I fed him spoonfuls of broth and stroked his hair during the long, coughing fits that left him gasping. My parents never visited, not once. I tried not to hate them, but some nights, I failed. One afternoon, Grandpa turned to me, his voice almost a whisper. "Claire, if this is the end, don't be afraid. I'm not." I choked on my reply. "I'm not ready," I whispered. He gave me the faintest smile. "None of us ever are. But you gave me something I never thought I'd find at the end piece." That night, as the sun dipped behind the hospital blinds, he drifted to sleep holding my hand. And somehow, I knew he wouldn't wake up again. I was still holding his hand when the monitors went flat. The room didn't erupt into panic like in the movies. No alarms, no dramatic doctors rushing in, just a soft, continuous tone and silence. A nurse entered quietly, checked his pulse, then gently laid a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, he's gone." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat closed up with grief I'd never known before. I bent down and pressed my forehead against the back of his frail hand, whispering, "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything." They let me sit with him for a while, and I did until his fingers turned cold and I couldn't pretend he was sleeping anymore. The funeral was held 3 days later in a small chapel just outside town. My parents arranged it, not out of grief, but obligation. A duty. Something to check off their list. They chose a basic pine coffin. The cheapest. No music, no photos. Just a generic priest reading from a script that didn't sound like Grandpa at all. I asked if I could give a eulogy. My mother looked at me with thinly veiled annoyance. "It's best we keep it short," she said. "People have places to be." So, I sat there, swallowing my words, while my father nodded blankly throughout the service, not shedding a single tear. My mother spent half the time checking her phone under the pew. Uncle James and Aunt Meredith showed up too, arriving late, leaving early, eyes dry and unmoved. There were no stories, no laughter, no memories. It was the loneliest goodbye I've ever seen. Afterward, I followed the hearse alone to the cemetery. No one else bothered. I stood by the grave as they lowered him into the earth. I threw a single sunflower down, a nod to the fields he once loved, and whispered, "You deserved better." And then I walked away. A week passed. I returned to my routines, me coding, my delivery shifts, the quiet space where Grandpa's voice still echoed in the walls. Then, one morning, I got a phone call from an unknown number. "Miss Claire Whitmore?" the voice asked. "Yes? This is Mr. Dalton, your grandfather's lawyer. He left a will. I'd like you to come in for the reading." My heart skipped. "A will?" "Yes," he replied calmly. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions, and you'll want to be present." The next day, I walked into a sleek office building downtown, my shoes still damp from the rain. I wasn't expecting anything. Not money, not property. Maybe an old watch, a letter, something simple. But when I stepped into the conference room and saw my parents, Uncle James, and Aunt Meredith already seated, and the tension in their shoulders, I knew something unexpected was coming. Mr. Dalton entered with a thick folder and a flash drive. He sat down, cleared his throat, and said, "Walter Carson left behind not just a will, but a legacy none of you were prepared for." And with that, everything began to change. The room was tense. No one spoke. My parents sat stiffly side by side, my mother with her arms folded tightly, my father tapping his foot with barely concealed impatience. Uncle James adjusted his tie like it might strangle him. Aunt Meredith avoided eye contact with everyone. Me? I was just numb. Mr. Dalton opened the folder slowly, the way someone might disarm a bomb. "Your grandfather's last will and testament was finalized 2 years ago," he began. "It was reviewed, notarized, and updated 3 months before his passing. In addition to the written document, he also recorded a video message to ensure transparency." He inserted the flash drive into a laptop and turned the screen toward us. And then, there he was. Grandpa, sitting in the wooden chair from our old apartment, wearing that same flannel shirt he loved. His voice was calm, steady, but unmistakably firm. "If you're watching this, I've passed, and I know some of you are here hoping for a piece of what I've left behind." He paused, letting the silence press against the room like a weight. "Let me be clear. The $1.2 million I gave to Thomas and Regina was in exchange for care, not charity, not inheritance, and they failed." My father shifted in his seat. My mother's mouth dropped slightly. "To James and Meredith, who once offered help but vanished when I needed it, don't think I've forgotten." Aunt Meredith let out a small gasp. Uncle James muttered something under his breath. Then Grandpa's eyes softened. "Claire, you saw me. You took me in when no one else would. You gave me dignity in my final months, and that's why I've left everything else I have, to you." Silence. Mr. Dalton clicked pause. My heart stopped. "Wait, everything?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Mr. Dalton nodded. "Walter Carson's estate includes not just the $1.2 million he previously transferred, but a concealed investment portfolio worth over $15 million, a private farmland trust in Montana valued at another $4 million, and additional liquid assets. All of it, per his will, is to be transferred solely to Claire Whitmore pending standard probate procedures." The room exploded. "What?" my father barked, leaping to his feet. "That's not possible!" my mother shrieked. "She manipulated him," Aunt Meredith accused. "He was old confused," Uncle James shouted. Mr. Dalton remained unmoved. "The documents are ironclad. There is also a notarized letter and signed video declaration affirming that Mr. Carson made this decision fully aware, without coercion. Legally, there is no contest." I sat frozen, head spinning. 15 million? A ranch? All of it. To me? I didn't know what to say. I hadn't done it for this. I'd done it because it was right, because love isn't transactional, because Grandpa mattered. "This isn't fair," my father growled, his face flushed with fury. "You gave him nothing," I said quietly, "except cold dinners and a locked door." For once, they had no reply. They didn't stop after the will reading. My phone rang nonstop for the next week, blocked numbers, fake names, desperate voicemails. My mother left me tearful messages. My father sent furious ones. Uncle James tried guilt. Aunt Meredith tried charm. "Claire, honey," she said in one voicemail, "we're family. Surely you don't mean to keep everything. Just a little to help us out?" But I remembered their silence when Grandpa was in that hospital bed, alone. I remembered who showed up with flowers and who didn't show up at all. I remembered who called him a burden, and who wiped his fevered forehead at 3 a.m. They weren't calling because they loved Grandpa. They were calling because they missed their chance at his money. One afternoon, my father showed up at my apartment. I didn't let him in. He stood outside the door yelling, his voice thick with rage. "Do you really think you deserve that kind of money? You lived in a shoebox and delivered groceries. You let him die in a dump." I opened the door just wide enough to look him in the eye. He died in peace, in love, with dignity. That's more than he ever had in your house. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. I closed the door. The next day, I met with Mr. Dalton again. I asked him to walk me through every asset, every clause. It was overwhelming, millions in investments, land holdings, accounts I never knew Grandpa had. "He trusted you, Claire," Mr. Dalton said. "But he also gave you a responsibility." I nodded. I knew. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the money, because of what to do with it. I could keep it all, move out of my tiny apartment, launch my startup, build the agricultural app I dreamed of, expand it, go national. I could live comfortably for the rest of my life. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandpa's tired smile. I heard his voice. "Don't let money blind you to who you are." So I made a choice. Yes, I funded my app Soil Sense, a digital tool to help small farmers optimize irrigation, reduce waste, and raise healthier crops. Within 3 months, I hired a team, rented a shared office downtown, and launched the beta version. But I didn't stop there. I set aside part of Grandpa's estate to create something else. A home. Not just for me, for others like him. I began working with local architects and elder care specialists to design a residential center, Walter's Garden, a place where elderly people who've been forgotten, discarded, or abandoned could live in peace. Not a hospital. A home. One with sunlight, laughter, books, flowers, and yes, chicken pot pie. My family found out through the papers. A local journalist published a story titled, "Granddaughter Inherits Millions, Builds Center for the Forgotten." My mother emailed me the article with one line. "You always did love making us look bad." I didn't reply. Because I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for the man who chose me when no one else did. For the man who saw Mano as a burden, but as someone worth believing in. And for myself, the version of me who could have given up but didn't. The grand opening of Walter's Garden fell on a crisp spring morning, sunlight spilling across the rose-lined walkway, the kind Grandpa would have paused to admire. The building stood tall but welcoming, all natural wood and wide windows, with a small windmill turning gently in the breeze, a tribute to the ranch life he once lived and loved. A modest crowd had gathered, city officials, local journalists, a few curious neighbors, and a dozen elderly residents already settled in, smiling from their new porches, sipping warm tea as music played softly from the speakers. I stood in front of the sign, Walter's Garden, a place to be seen, heard, and held. My voice trembled slightly as I spoke. This place was born from a man who gave quietly, who believed dignity isn't a luxury, it's a right. My grandfather taught me that family is not always who shares your blood, but who shows up when no one else does. As the ribbon fell and applause rippled through the crowd, I looked up at the sky blue, wide, endless, and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." In the months that followed, Soil Sense blossomed. What began as a half-coded idea in a cramped apartment now powered farms across Oregon, Washington, and even parts of Montana. Farmers wrote to thank us. One sent a photo of his revived field with the caption, "Your app saved this." I cried when I saw it. Each success, each new partnership, each harvested crop felt like a silent nod from Grandpa. A reminder that even the smallest seeds, when nurtured, could grow into something that feeds others. The rest of the family faded into the background. My parents tried one final time to reconnect. A birthday card. An invitation to brunch. A lukewarm apology wrapped in self-pity. I didn't respond. Not out of hate, but peace. I had no space left for empty people. Uncle James and Aunt Meredith attempted a legal challenge. Mr. Dalton sent them the video again. They dropped it. They never visited Walter's garden. Not once. One afternoon, I was sitting in the courtyard of the center, watching two elderly women tend to a tomato plant, when a young girl approached me. She couldn't have been more than 10. Hair in braids, eyes wide with worry. She clutched a notebook to her chest. "Miss Claire?" "Yes?" "My grandpa's sick. My parents say he's too much. Can he come here?" I felt my throat tighten. I bent down, met her eyes. "Of course. Bring him. We'll make room." She smiled and ran off. And I sat there, holding back tears, realizing that this garden wasn't just a playseat, was a ripple, a promise, a legacy. Some nights, I still hear Grandpa's voice in the quiet. "Don't let money blind you to who you are. When you fall, get back up. You don't need millions to matter." He gave me those words. He gave me purpose. He planted something in me that the world tried to crush but couldn't. If you're reading this, and you feel like you've been discarded, underestimated, forgotten, listen to me. You are not your failures. You are not what others refuse to see. You are the seed. And one day, with enough love and light, you will bloom. Just like I did. Just like he did. In a place we now call Walter's Garden.